This quick video is going to decrease a ton of the anxiety that you have about compliance. When working with our clients or anyone in general, we urge essentially compliance within 5 different criteria. The reason we choose 5 is we believe that they act as the clear boundaries that keep you out of trouble. These 5 relate to how you interact with students, communicate with students, disclose certain information to students, help them make a decision to apply and enroll at your institution, and in how you discuss financial aid options with students. Why these 5? Essentially, they focus on a broad set of standards and compliance criteria or rules set by federal entities, state bodies, and different accreditors throughout the country. When looking at higher education compliance as it pertains to marketing and enrollment, we typically take the measure of leaning into the highest set of standards. If you meet the highest set of standards, then you essentially can decrease your risk exponentially across all your outward communication to students, whether it's through web assets, email, text, social media, voice-to-voice interaction, in person, print flyers, however it is that you interact with students. We believe these 5 set criteria can keep you out of most of the trouble that you can get into. The type of institution you work for or work with can, in some circumstances or situations, essentially alleviate your need for either over disclosure or meeting heightened sense of standards of compliance. Our belief is just operate at the highest level of standard. You'll do your students right. You'll never get in trouble by promising, guaranteeing, or saying the wrong thing. And you'll also keep all the accreditors, feds, and the state bodies at bay. We typically start with financial aid. Financial aid is important. Most students are worried about how they can afford their education. There's a clear set standard that essentially says a student may never be led to believe that they can qualify for any type of aid through any type of institution. Where most schools get in trouble is that they don't disclose that properly, or they get into the gray area of insinuating that a student may qualify. And if a student makes their decision to apply or attend your institution based off the assumption that they will qualify for aid to pay for their education, you're essentially out of compliance. Now, these rules have been held to a very high standard to for-profit institutions, private universities and colleges, but it's actually the same standard to all higher education in America. A student cannot be led to believe that they may qualify for a certain federal grant, a certain loan amount, a repayment rate, a monthly payment, an interest rate on a federal loan. You're essentially not allowed to do it, specifically not allowed to do it to insinuate or motivate a student's decision to enroll or apply at your institution. First, look at all your collateral. If any of your collateral is written in such a way that it may create any hope for a student to qualify for certain types of aid and move them to apply or enroll at your institution, change that, modify that. Second, make sure your employees are trained how to communicate on eligibility. And it's not just your financial aid officers or your financial aid department. It's your counselors, advisors, recruiters, outreach folks out in the community, high school representatives, essentially anybody that's responsible for communicating with a student about their decision to apply or enroll at your institution needs to have the proper training around how to communicate the financial aid eligibility. Finally, have the proper disclosures essentially on any piece of collateral or content, digital or print, that a student may interact with. So if they are on your financial aid page and you list all the available options through your institution, what we find is not disclosing that financial aid is only eligible for those who qualify can get you in trouble, whether it's through the Federal Trade Commission, the FCC, the Department of Education, your state body, or your accreditor. So that's essentially wall 1 or boundary 1 for us. A second area that we find most universities struggle with or institutions is the concept of transfer of credit. Most students' decisions are based on time in school. So can I afford it? How long will I be at your institution? And what we find is that most students, other than graduating high school freshmen, have some type of credit that they'd like to transfer in, And most students have an aspiration for further education. It could be after attending your institution, whether you're a community college or maybe a career training institution, or some long-term career plan where they see a need for furthering degrees to attain a certain job that they want 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And the rules are very simple on this. In our higher education system, no institution can guarantee that they can accept credit from another institution or that their credits will transfer to another institution to any student. The rule is transfer of credit is only up to the receiving institution. So the most extreme application of this rule would sound something like this. You received an undergraduate degree from Harvard in business, and you're looking to get your master's degree at a small private Christian university in Tuskegee, Alabama. And they can make the decision to not accept those credits from Harvard. And there's nothing stopping that university from making that decision. So again, most of these high-risk, get-in-trouble regs are designed around influencing a student's decision to apply or enroll at your institution based off of false or misleading information. So since we know for sure that transfer of credit is never guaranteed because it's always up to the receiving institution, the concept applies to the same as financial aid eligibility. You have to be really clear in your content, your creative, your web assets, and in your communication through your staff and online and in print that transfer of credit's not guaranteed in or out. The only caveat to this is essentially articulation agreements. So if your institution has a written, executed articulation agreement with another university, whether it's to accept their credits or for them to accept your credit, you can clearly market that, communicate that, and use that as a form of advertising to motivate the student or to create a competitive advantage for your college for students to want to apply or enroll there. The rules apply the same. Disclose, train staff, and don't insinuate in any kind of way in your communication. So you should review all your collateral. You should have the proper disclosures throughout any of your web assets, emails, or print material related to credit to allow students to understand that credit transfer is not guaranteed in or out. Our third guardrail is related to outcomes, specifically employment after graduation. Again, our application of these rulings or standards are at the highest level of standard. The way we do that is we look at the most strict state bodies throughout the United States. We look at the most strict Department of Education standards. We look at the most strict bylaws through accreditors, regional or national, and we help our clients or our audience essentially put those into application so that they are not at risk of citation, they're not at risk of audit, or at risk of lawsuit or a class action lawsuit. When it comes to employment, the rule is very simple. No student can be guaranteed employment upon graduation into any type of job. So this is a little difficult to understand, right? An institution's goal is to essentially improve its community. One way they do that is through teaching specific competencies, skill sets into students so that they can become gainfully employed after graduation. Well, the highest standards of compliance essentially say, I cannot persuade a student's decision to apply or enroll or use aid at my institution based off of the guarantee of employment, and that's guarantee of type of job, that's guarantee of employment within a certain time after graduation, and that's guarantee of wage upon graduation. And schools that do that essentially are at risk for misleading or misguiding the student or forcing the student to apply, enroll, or start school at that institution based off of the guarantee or promise of certain employment. Common sense wise, you really can't. Every single student's situation is different. Students' lives change. They move. They may get in trouble. They may not graduate. They may not graduate on time. You may change curriculum. A course that was available may no longer be. A certain certification offered through one of your classes may no longer be offered through one of your classes. That's essentially where it comes from. What most accreditors, Department of Education, and state bodies care about is that they don't want you essentially misleading students into taking out loans to attend your institution based off of a false promise of employment. Do you essentially use a case study of an employer that's hired 5,000 of your students in the last 50 years as a way to uplift your brand and position it in a manner that's motivating students to make decisions about your institution? You'll want to reword that. You'll want to reproduce that. The rules don't say you can't speak to it. So for example, if I'm a university and Verizon has hired a lot of my graduates, I can say that, but it's in the manner in how I communicate it. That could be you. You could go work at Verizon. Our average student makes $150,000 after graduation. That essentially would be crossing the line. You would be using that story to motivate or incentivize the student to attend your institution. Proper disclosure is also important. So anywhere you use a student testimonial, an employer highlight, speak to your placement stats, are you properly disclosing that you're not guaranteeing employment to current, active, prospective, or graduate student? And finally, misleading statements. And this one's new. So the Federal Trade Commission has become very active in higher education over the last 24 months or so. And they are essentially the ones that will enforce the basic premise of standards or guidelines related to misleading statements. And misleading statements can be applied differently to different institutions based off of your accreditation. So depending on your institution, saying something like, you will learn the following competency in this course, can be a misleading statement. A different variation of that that's compliant, and this is kind of at the most aggressive version of this interpretation, you would have to say something along the lines of, you'll have the opportunity to learn the following competency in this class, because you cannot guarantee that the student will. You may give them the best instructor, the best course, the best resources, the best curriculum, textbook, and that student may just not be able to learn it. And since you can't guarantee that every single student will learn it, that essentially could and will qualify it as a misleading statement. A much broader use case of this is insinuating that one student's outcomes could be another's. So using a graduate success story forcefully to insinuate or motivate or move a student to decide to apply or enroll at your institution is use of misleading information. Where most schools get in trouble here, essentially not auditing their collateral appropriately to reflect accurate information. So you may have a course that's taught in the spring that has 150 lab hours, but in your course catalog or syllabus, it might say 148. The Federal Trade Commission will flag that as misleading information. And they've been known to essentially go from leave it alone to a memo or notice or an infraction and citation. And in the case of higher education and Federal Trade Commission, that fine per infraction can be anywhere from $10,000 to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it's essentially a charge put on every infraction of it. So you could have a video out with misleading information that's been seen 1,000 times. That's 1,000 infractions of those certain bylaws and standards that pertain to colleges. Applies the same. Educate your marketing staff, educate your admissions staff, your advisory staff, educate your financial aid team, audit all your collateral to make sure that it's accurate and not misleading. Never use certain stories in a misleading manner to push or motivate students to take action on a decision to apply or enroll at your institution. And finally, have the proper disclosures as set forth by clear standards by your accreditor, the federal government, federal entities, Department of Education, and state bodies, so that students clearly understand that you're not trying to mislead them. In conclusion, you don't have to be scared or nervous about compliance. You also don't have to ride the waves. You don't have to move with the ever-changing laws. Operate at the highest standard like we do with our clients. Disclose properly. Make sure that you're not persuading or motivating students to make decisions based off the outcomes of one student, 1 year, a stat, or misleading information. Have someone in your corner, whether it's an internal staff member that becomes expert at this or somebody like us at Engine Systems, to support you appropriately so that you would never have to be impacted, your brand or your reputation.